Everyone, my name is Isaac Jeter, and I am a third-year Master of Divinity student at Southeastern University in Lakeland, Florida. And I wanted to make this video to document my theological progress. As I navigate my degree, I have about a year and a half left. I'm halfway through what I'm referring to as my super junior year, because it is more or less a 4-year program, graduate school after bachelor's. I got my undergrad at St. Leo University in St. Leo, Florida, close to Dade City. And I wanted to discuss. This video is not going to be edited very much, and I might lose my train of thought, and I might trail off, but this is more so for record keeping, and maybe it's helpful for discussion to the world, but it was recommended to me to try this out, and try it out, I will. So to begin, I started this semester in August. Today, my goodness, I think today is the 19th December 2025. And so I began, I want to say the last week of August, so just about 4 months ago. And I began with Hebrew 1. I had discerned, not the entire time, but basically it took me 4 years to discern, pray, and petition the Lord to allow me to do Hebrew as my first ancient language, because it makes sense as a Christian to take Greek. Everyone takes Greek. That will inform my studies in ways that Hebrew likely wouldn't when it came to the New Testament. But I have such great passion for the Hebrew scriptures that it became to where I was asking the Lord, like, listen, please, this is where I feel my heart is at. I know Greek makes more sense, and it would be a lot more helpful to the community I serve in. This is, by the way, if you're wondering why my space is so dark, this is my office at the church I work at. And that's my desk over there. But the desk I'm occupying right now is the guest desk, the extra one that I come to for homework and things of that nature. But anyway, I decided to do Hebrew first because I love the Hebrew scriptures. I love diving into what I believe is our ancestral faith. How I describe it, sometimes we as Christians get too involved in Christian material. And I'm not saying or suggesting that we start ingesting large amounts of secular material, but instead that we dig deeper into our faith, because the Christian worldview is ultimately what I've adopted and what I believe is the ultimate truth. But understanding perhaps its roots to some regard, and also understanding from a different perspective how unique Christianity is, requires outside studies. And what I've been a proponent of is the study of philosophy, a little bit of psychology, and history, of course. But I think, and ancient religions. In particular, the Hebrew scriptures, Judaism, it's unlocked for me an identity that I would not have and would greatly hinder my faith if I didn't have. It's why I read the narratives in Genesis. And Genesis is one of my favorite Hebrew scripture texts, by the way. I feel like I'm talking to my forefathers. And that's why I took Hebrew. And the Lord finally granted me it at the perfect timing, according to His will. But with the caveat that I would learn Greek also. And so Greek for me will probably come in 2 years' time as I draw closer to graduation, and might actually be extra graduate. because it doesn't quite, 2 ancient languages won't fit within the program requirements of my degree. And so if I want to continue my studies at another institution, I need to take Greek at some point. All that to say, long-winded, Hebrew was great. This is my workbook, not the text, but my workbook. Began in August, and actually, I'm working on a vlog on my other channel, Isaac Jeter Photography. We had to write the alphabet 100 times, and most of this stuff I did on an airplane or in Canada. Now, I'm from Florida. I live here in Florida. Never been to Canada. Aside from this past August and September, it was for a work trip. I am a photographer, and I did it for a soccer tournament. And so it was so cool committing these things to memory 30,000 feet in the air. It was very poetic. It was very romantic in the traditional sense. I'll never forget that experience. What I will say though, and I do it for my own record keeping and because it brings my heart joy, we had a Google Drive link with this song that helped us learn the Hebrew alphabet. And I'm telling you, I am being 100% truthful. When I first started learning it, we had 1 in-person class. The rest has been online. We meet 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 4 to 5, just about. But this is the first year they've ever had it completely online because the head professor moved out of state. And so it was so intimidating. We only had 1 in-person class to get us all introduced to one another. Thank you to that professor for taking the time to do it. Dr. McNaughton, God bless him, for specifically wanting us to be together one time in person. But he sent out a drive link with this alphabet song, and I was learning it on the plane. As I looked down upon the ATL, Atlanta, or wherever else we were flying over, I'm learning this song. I had it saved onto my phone because of the lack of Wi-Fi. And I remember listening to it, I don't know, not to the point of like, I'm gonna go crazy, but I remember like, I have to, there's no choice. So I listened to it a lot. And here it is.
Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei, Tzadei, Kof, Reis, Sin, Shin, Tav. You bet I know my Hebrew alphabet.
Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei, Tzadei, Kof, Reis, Sin, Shin, Tav. And now I know my Hebrew alphabet. Something like that. Over and over again. It's also not a good time to be studying Hebrew in the world. People don't like Israel, and I don't want to make light of that. But walking through an airport, an international airport, not because I was trying to get attention, but carrying this around, I chuckled. I'm like, I'm probably getting a couple looks every now and again. But remaining sensitive in that, I really love studying Hebrew. I will say this, and I'll be respectful in this way. I don't think the class format, and I don't think this particular text, the combination of the two, was conducive to my learning. I really struggled with how we have the class set up, and some of it's probably because it's the first time being fully online and there's a lack of immersion. But I have learned French in the past, and I learned from a French teacher who is literally French. Her first language, Madame Maldonado. Yeah, so I really enjoyed her class, and it gave me my first affinity for learning foreign languages. And so that is my frame of reference for any language I learn, because it was so impactful and done so well, so immersive, had extra curricular resources for us, songs, things from like the 80s that she grew up on listening to as a kid. It's cool. Anyway, not for comparison, not to say that this class wasn't prepared well. It just wasn't quite what I was hoping for and what I needed. I'll be finishing up Hebrew 2 next semester, beginning 14 January 2026. And it's going to be a 16-week course, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I really enjoyed it. I felt like it unlocked a portion of my brain, but also required a maths portion of my brain. Forgive me if you hear any background noise. We're preparing for a Christmas party here at church. But I literally felt, like physically felt, a different portion of my brain working, because I'm used to write essays. I'm used to reading hundreds of pages of books. This felt different as I was studying. It was quite wild. And I began to see Hebrew characters in the most natural settings, like the streaks on my windshield at times, or I look in the tiling of a building or something and see, like, it was cool. Moving on. So that was a 16-week course from August to December. I also did Reformation Through Modern Thought, which is a historical theology class, and I loved it. Now, I'm telling you, I love philosophy. I love history. Again, I apologize for the background noise. And I love things of that nature because they help me understand what I believe in a context that is very real. And that's what I felt was missing with Hebrew, it was very insular. I finally had my questions answered. Like, what if we just studied language outside of geography, outside of history, all that kind of stuff, because we did that in French. There's a level of detachment that occurs when you don't implement certain things into language learning, and I believe that was the biggest issue I had with Hebrew. Going back to Reformation Through Modern Thought, I prepared a lot for it because for the first time ever in graduate school, I took 2 classes at once, all the while working full-time and a few other things here or there. And I can assure you guys and myself and anyone, as long as I can avoid it, I will never do that again. I did it. I think I got really great grades. I ended up getting a very high B in Hebrew. And I think I'm still in the grading process for my final grade for Reformation. I think I got an A, high A. But it dehumanized me. It detached me from regular life, my family, my friends, to some degree, my ability to work. If I want to be for real, I had a hard time working here at my job and being present for people because studies were at the forefront of my mind constantly. Because it was necessary. I wasn't isolating myself for any malicious purposes. It was simply I needed to. At my old undergrad, as I mentioned, St. Leo University, which I live closer to than Southeastern. And I was going there to their library 3 nights a week, Monday, Tuesday, and often Thursday. I even took a step back, not because of this class, but the Lord actually led me to step back in some of my roles here, namely as the music director, which I would dedicate my my Thursdays and Sundays to weekly. That was unrelated to school, but it seemed so it seemed to align so perfectly that I was now able to spend another night in my studies. And I even got a week's worth. I even got module 1 for Reformation finished before the class even began. I was not playing around because I didn't want my GPA to fall. So Reformation was up there, along with the theology of worship, along with spirit-empowered discipleship, along with Pratico, a few other. These are the best classes I've taken at Southeastern, and sometimes, to no one's fault, sometimes with studies, once you hit a really good class and then you have a few classes that you're like, I know I need them, I just don't care for them very much, you can kind of feel like you're living, like the best days in academia are behind you. Surely no class I could have could beat what I just did. This was one of those classes where it reminds me, like, this is why I love academia. Reformation Through Modern Thought was the class I needed. I cannot stress that enough. And I would say it across the board, universally, for any theologian to understand what has occurred within the past 500 to 600 years, namely in Europe, and how European decisions have affected decisions in all the other continents. Can't stress it enough. So for that class, I had 4 required readings, and I picked up this book as well. This series is incredible. It is a very short introduction series, and it is on the Catholic Reformation, which I wrote my final paper on. It was about a 10-page paper. And again, this was the Lord. I'm talking a day or two after this video posted by a channel called Gospel Simplicity. I'll link it down below. They posted a video about the Catholic Reformation, and I had 3 choices that I was considering personally preparing for this final essay. I was either going to write on Anglicanism, the Protestant academic tradition, or the Catholic Reformation. And I am telling you, the Lord did this. He orchestrated this. I wouldn't put it past God to have orchestrated this video in advance for me to have something to write this paper on. It's not to put too much emphasis on me. It's not to say that I don't want to think higher than myself than I need to. I don't want to be prideful, but for me, it puts the ball back in God's court. Like, God, you did this. This is great. Anyway, so James E. Kelly, English guy, came on and just finished writing this book. Like, it's so, everything aligns so well, because this book was written in like 2025. It just got published, as far as I'm aware, or something to that effect. I want to fact check that with the publishing stuff. Yep, 2025. Under the, I think it's Oxford. Yep, Oxford University Press. Incredible book, short, to the point. I ultimately wrote it on the development of pastoral care within the Catholic Church as a result of the Catholic Reformation. Another book, this was a required reading. I think it was an incredible book as well, because it was incredibly supplemental. Like, it was good supplemental reading. It was a different kind of perspective of historical developments within Christianity during the Renaissance, Enlightenment, etc. To another history book I'll be showing you in a moment. This is by Douglas Jacobsen, A Global Gospel, and it's a very brief survey of how the gospel was planted and how it grew in each continent. Latin America, definitely. I just haven't read Liberation Theology by Gustavo Gutierrez. In April, May, something like that. Incredible follow-up. Yep, that's one. Required reading, I read that in full. Its counterpart History of Christianity by Dolly. And I only read half of this because that was all that was required for Reformation. We began about middle of the book, but incredible book. I enjoyed this so much that I'm going to go back and read the first half, I think, during my break. Incredible book. Highly recommend, but if the publisher just so happens to read this, or Tim Doley reads this, there are so many typos in this, it's crazy. Grammatical, spelling. It's not just like, oh, out of 400 pages I encountered 2. I encountered probably at least 10. I think it's, what is it, Fortress Press? It should be it's Fortress Press. It's a reputable publisher, but there were seriously like at least 10 typos. To the point where I'm like, this is unprofessional. Anyway, not throwing anyone under the bus. This book I read in its entirety, Reclaiming Pietism, and this explains much of the pietistic bent of evangelical, namely Pentecostal Christianity, or holiness movement Christianity, Methodism, all of those similar traditions. I don't know if this would be a first read, because it is a survey of an offshoot of German Lutheranism. The thing is, this is really integral to understanding some pertinent points within evangelicalism. Its subtitle is Retrieving an Evangelical Tradition. It's just not something that I would recommend to someone that is just getting into church history or historical theology. But it would, at some point, I would say, this is very revealing. It was a good book. It's a slow read at times, I wouldn't say it's dense, it's just maybe it's dense. It's not hard, it's not a difficult read is what I'm trying to say, but incredible content. Finally, this is a compilation of primary sources edited by Keith D. Stenglin, Reformation of the Modern Church, and we just read a bunch of excerpts out of this. This is an incredible resource, but again, whatever was in here was substantiating what was in here. So it was a little bit of supplemental reading. So I don't know, I probably read a third of this at most, read half of this, and then these 3. Thumbnail. I read the entirety of those 3. So what did I learn? A few takeaways from this semester, both. I'll start with the class and then go into experientially, wisdom-wise. Reformation Through Modern Thought has been so integral into me understanding where the evangelical tradition, which I find myself a part of in 2025, why it is the way it is. Especially Pentecostalism, which I'm not going to be critical toward anything in particular, just for the sake of being a peacemaker. But there are a lot of things that I don't care, especially along the anti-intellectual side of my faith, my tradition, my cultural upbringing. Some of the more fundamental beliefs, like in terms of fundamentalists, the movement that rejected liberal theology in the early 20th century. These things were paramount for me to learn if I am going to serve others. No tradition will truly be without bias, will be without error. It's my personal belief, and I believe I can substantiate that in many ways. But there are certain practices within Protestant Christianity, and at this point it feels like, let's be honest, the 21st century, Protestant Christianity is much less Protestant. No, hear everything I'm saying, is much less Protestant and much more evangelical. And that's what I'm even seeing within its detractors, because Protestant theology ends up being prosperity, gospel, word of faith, Pentecostalism, or the charismatic movement. These are the associations. And finding out that there was an intellectual, historical intellectual movement within Protestantism to a fault, to the point of the intellect of the believer mattered more than the faith, because of the limitations on intellectualism within my tradition. It was actually a little bit refreshing to see that intellect had been so focused on that. That's the reason Pietism arose. People were sick of not being able to articulate theology perfectly and being labeled as poor believers because of it. The reason why that's important to know is because, as a evangelical for the time being, I don't know if I will always be, there are certain things that I love about it, that I'm so grateful to the Lord for instilling within these kind of communities, which I can make a separate video on. I'm going to stay focused for now. Certain elements of evangelicalism override Protestantism as a whole, and it becomes a caricature of what it once was. And that's what this course detailed for me. Now, I'm sure a number of people, depending on their ecclesial backgrounds and their experiences, their hurts and their pains and what they like, would receive something different from this course. I personally went into it thinking, I've got to figure out why there are so many silly things. Again, forgive us for the noise. So many silly things involved in evangelicalism. And I found out why. Much of what we experience and much of what Protestants, who, according against the gospel simplicity, if you are a Protestant, if you remain Protestant in 21st century, ought to have something you're actually protesting about.
One of the comments that Protestant YouTubers receive all the time is, "What are you protesting?" In fact, the more you study church history, the more you're forced to reckon with the nature of Protestantism. It remains the case that Protestantism inevitably exists in some relationship to the Catholic Church out of which it came. And once you come to that conclusion, it's a fair question to ask, what are you protesting? Because here's the deal. If you don't have good reasons for being Protestant, the general force of history and tradition will likely lead you to becoming Catholic or Orthodox. Many Protestants have lost any sense of a thick Protestant identity grounded in the Reformation. This has been accelerated by the rise of non-denominational churches, which by nature cut themselves off from the past, at least institutionally.
All that to mention, much of what we are frustrated by in the evangelical church, much of what Protestantism has become is a product of American Christianity. And we know that. Everyone in their nan knows that American Christianity is very unique, and historically, within the past, 150, 200 years, has spread outwardly through missionary work, now through the internet, things like that. America, it was substantiated to me, I've heard it before, America truly is an idea. The idea of the United States is a social experiment. And I don't think all of it is good. But this is coming on the other side of history. It's not that America, when it was first birthed, its inception, it's not that it wasn't needed, but as we look at the time and say, hey, maybe we should rethink some of these Americanisms. Especially, I was taking Hebrew with Death of Charlie Kirk. That occurred during this semester, and I watched it over and over again because of the internet. I watched the event, and it made me so depressed. It did something to my mind that forever it did something to me. I just got out of a class during the summer with Bonhoeffer and his ethics. And being influenced by Kierkegaard, the existentialist, he's saying national identity should not be a part of strong Christianity. I encourage you to do some research on it. It's even substantiated again in this book, in Dolder, that infusing one's national identity with their faith often leads to complacency or corruption from within. I mean, we look at some of the state churches within Europe, and you could see it becomes much more of a cultural tradition rather than true biblical faith. And so, landing this theological plane, I hope this hasn't been ranty. I've been so excited to learn these things. This may be where I get into the critiques. I will never, again, I will re-emphasize this, I will never take 2 classes again. It hurt my studies, it hurt my personal life, it hurt my work life. And I wouldn't recommend it. It's a whole lot to undertake. But I learned so much, and I feel like I also turned 27 during this class, during Hebrew, namely, in September. So much has happened within the past 4 months. And anyone who sleeps on 4 months being a long time, 4 months is a long time. Believe me. But I wouldn't say I've become more critical of America, or now I'm on this tirade and going, like, instead of shouting the British are coming, I'm saying the end is nigh. Like, what I'm trying to say is I'm not now super hypercritical. I've not poured kerosene on the fire. It's actually instilled a lot of peace within me that I've noticed these issues within American Christianity, which I'm not going to critique. I'm not going to be, cliche. I'm not going to say we're all rich and white, and I don't believe all that crap. What I'm critiquing is that our faith, specifically from a pastoral standpoint, our faith has slipped so far. Sure, because we're wealthy. Sure, because we have social privilege. Sure, because all of these things, they contribute. But ultimately, it is at the foundation of American Christianity, this sense of independence to a fault. To a fault. And again, on the other side of history, I find there's time for change. There's need for change. It's like being a rebellious teenager. At the moment, it made sense, and maybe some of it was justified, but I use my own life. As a teenager, getting into trouble, experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and staying up late playing video games made a lot of sense to me at 16 years old, 17, 18, 19. As a 27-year-old, none of that makes sense. And instead of saying, well, there was a purpose for it at the time, if I don't do it anymore, then it stunts your growth and prevents new things from coming in. And so my petition to the American church, of which I belong, I'm speaking to myself, and I've done great work on myself personally, is be appropriately independent. protest against the old way of doing things, the way before the Reformation, where poor behavior and leadership was pasted over, was plastered over with, well, God put them in place. How can you question the person God has put in place? Enough of that. But we've got to abandon this, what I believe is rebellious independence. Independence to a fault. Independence to where we have become caricatures of the very people who fought for independence. We are now on the other side of it, and change is necessary. That is what I got out of this course. And I thank God for it. I thank God for what this semester has done to me. And I'll use a little bit stronger language here. This semester has been hell for me. I wish I could produce tears. That's how hard it's been. But I just finished my final essay Tuesday. It's Friday now. And let me tell you, oh Christian out there, when you finish strong, when you know the end is in sight and you say, no matter what, I don't care if I'm crawling on all fours. I don't care if I have not slept, if I've not eaten, if I've been deprived of affection. If that is what God requires of me, if that is what will please the Lord, then do it. I'll end on this. I just watched a short video about John Piper, and he said, someone asked him about his sermon prep, like, how do you sermon prep? He said, the last 40 years of my life has been sermon prep.
So let's talk now about sermon preparation. And I don't mean the preparation in the last 30 seconds, like we talked about earlier. I mean everything that goes into a sermon. And I say everything because if somebody asks me after I preach, how long did it take you to prepare that? I say, 40 years. And I really believe it. I think my teenage struggle with acne went into that sermon 50 years later.
And what he meant by that is every experience, every pain, every bit of suffering was producing in me what the people of God needed. So although I am not a glutton for punishment, I recognize the impactfulness of semesters like these. I recognize that it has instilled within me questions and answers that I will be chewing on for the rest of my life because of the suffering, and I mean true suffering, I have endured in 16 weeks. It is meaningful to me. This is my story. I'm glad to share it.